In the late 1940s, two massive nations emerged from the ashes of empire and civil war. India and China started at the exact same baseline, impoverished, agrarian, and struggling to feed their populations. Today, China is positioned to dictate the future of global technology and trade. Meanwhile, India still struggles to manufacture basic high-tech components, relying heavily on foreign imports for everything from medical equipment to military drones. This massive gap exists because of a false ego. We claim the title of Vishwaguru, or world teacher, leaning on philosophical posturing, while lacking the hard industrial reality to actually support that title. China ignores philosophical titles. They operate on cold, hard realism. If a road needs to be built, it gets built. They rely on strict, actionable execution to solve problems. To understand why these two paths diverged so sharply, we have to look away from the military borders. The real answer lies inside the broken internal domestic engines of both nations. The first major crack in India's foundation starts in the classroom, specifically with cognitive load. When a student learns a new skill, their brain has a finite amount of processing power to dedicate to that task. In the 1970s, China implemented a massive language mandate. The government decided that all public education would happen in Mandarin. Because Chinese students learn in their native tongue, 100% of their cognitive energy goes directly towards mastering technical skills. Under the Indian model, forcing English means 70% of mental energy is wasted translating. Only 30% is left for actual skill acquisition. This linguistic barrier creates an artificial inferiority complex. Millions of brilliant students feel inadequate, not because they lack intelligence, but simply because they lack fluency in a foreign tongue. By prioritizing colonial linguistic prestige over actual technical competence, India actively handicaps its own future workforce. The second major failure point is demographic. You cannot build an economic powerhouse while deliberately keeping half your population off the factory floor. China systematically integrated women into manufacturing. By bringing female workers onto the production lines, they effectively doubled their economic engine overnight. In contrast, Indian societal norms still heavily restrict women to domestic roles. This sidelines a massive pool of talent and places an impossible financial pressure exclusively on men to provide. Even when the workforce does produce, it hits a wall of bureaucratic self-sabotage. The system actively hinders domestic innovation. Take magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI machines. These are complex diagnostic scanners used to detect severe diseases. India doesn't manufacture these domestically, so hospitals must import them. Instead of incentivizing local production, the government slaps punishing import duties on this life-saving technology. The human cost is severe. The high import taxes get passed down to patients, making critical scans unaffordable for the poor, and leading directly to preventable late-stage cancer deaths. Projecting global strength is impossible when your internal bureaucracy punishes innovation and your social structures keep half your workforce at home. This domestic weakness forces a nation to play defense on the global stage. When a country is fractured inside, it becomes reactive outside. Global superpowers run on a realist playbook. They maintain dominance not through direct conflict, but through proxy wars and lucrative weapon sales to smaller nations. China explicitly uses this strategy. They fund and arm proxies like North Korea to intentionally distract the United States and keep American military focus away from Taiwan. India, on the other hand, relied heavily on philosophical idealism. When the British hastily drew chaotic partition lines in 1947, Indian leaders accepted them instead of pushing back with hard power. Early leadership missed a critical historical window. Instead of aggressively securing the geopolitical perimeter while the borders were still fresh, they chose ideological diplomacy. The consequence is sitting right next door. Pakistan, fueled by military control and extremism, became the perfect proxy for superpowers to keep India bogged down in endless regional conflicts. India's ideological idealism allowed rival powers to permanently define its borders and manufacture its geopolitical distractions. The idea of a rules-based international order is an illusion. As the devastation in Gaza shows, the world operates strictly on economic leverage and military-industrial power, not on the appeals of human rights organizations. You can give all the speeches you want at the UN, but diplomatic posturing cannot compensate for a lack of hard domestic power. Absolute self-reliance in technology and infrastructure is the true currency of a global superpower. When India invests in its own engineering, like the space program at ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, it proves what is possible through indigenous innovation. The path forward requires abandoning the false ego. India must build equitable education systems in its own languages, integrate its entire population into the workforce, and adopt a ruthless pragmatism. You cannot win a modern geopolitical war if your internal engine is running on borrowed parts and bureaucratic delays.